Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. It was a crisp October evening when I finally returned home to our quiet Tennessee suburb. I had been away on a week-long solo fishing trip up at Dale Hollow Lake, a tradition I'd started years ago to recharge, clear my head, and come back ready to face the world. This time, though, something felt different the second I pulled into the driveway. The porch light flickered like it hadn't been touched in days, though Kelly was usually meticulous about these little things. The flower beds I had carefully tended before leaving were dry and neglected. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I noticed the faint scent of a new perfume, one I couldn't recall Kelly ever wearing before. I called out, "Kelly," but was met with silence. It wasn't until I set my duffel bag down that I noticed the living room, pristine. Almost too pristine. No coffee mug left on the table. No knitting project abandoned on the couch. Just stillness. The week wore on, and Kelly acted like nothing was wrong. If anything, she was overly cheerful. She'd hum to herself while making dinner, glance at her phone more than usual, and laughed a bit too hard at jokes that weren't funny. Every evening, I found myself staring across the dinner table, wondering if the woman I married was putting on a show. Then came the family barbecue that Saturday. The entire neighborhood was there, from old Mr. Hill with his crooked hat to little Emily running around with sparklers. We were all gathered around the grill when I, half joking, said, "Careful, honey, I might run off with one of the neighbor girls." Kelly, cheeks flushed deep red, blurted out loud enough for half the yard to hear, "Oh, please, like you didn't already cheat on me like I did with your buddy." She stopped herself. Froze. Everyone turned to her. The air thickened with silence, the kind that presses on your chest and won't let you breathe. My heart thudded against my ribs. What did she just say? Did she admit something? And who? My eyes scanned the crowd, landing on familiar faces, none giving away a clue. The tension only lasted seconds, but it felt like eternity. Kelly quickly forced a laugh and waved it off. "I'm just messing," she said, brushing it off like it was just a joke. The party slowly returned to normal, but I couldn't. Not after that. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words looping in my head. Who was she talking about? What did she mean? And why did it feel like the woman next to me wasn't the same Kelly I married? The first seed of suspicion was planted, and it was already starting to grow. The next few days passed like walking through a fog, each moment heavy with the weight of that slip at the barbecue. I went about my routines, mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters, even repainting the back fence, but my mind never wandered far from Kelly's words. I watched her closely. She was still humming, still grinning that polished, hollow smile. It wasn't until Thursday evening, when I decided to grab something from the attic, that I found it. I was pulling down the old Christmas decorations when a small, neatly wrapped box slipped out from between the wreaths and crashed softly onto the attic floor. At first glance, I figured it was something she had hidden for me, maybe an early anniversary gift. I picked it up and noticed the wrapping was a little too elegant: silver foil, a deep green ribbon, and a small card tucked underneath. Curiosity won over, and I slid the card free. It simply read, "Can't wait for Friday night." Wear it for me. There was no name. My stomach dropped. With shaking hands, I unwrapped the box, and inside was a sleek leather wallet, monogrammed. Not with my initials. Jite. No one in my family or hers had those initials. Not even distant relatives. I checked the receipts inside. It wasn't a random purchase. It was personalized, pre-ordered from a boutique downtown. Kelly had gone out of her way for this. I clenched the box so tightly that the edges bit into my palm. A gift meant for someone else, hidden under my roof. The betrayal simmered under my skin. At first, I thought about confronting her right then and there. I even rehearsed a dozen versions of it while pacing in the attic, each more dramatic than the last. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wanted to see how far she would go. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was onto her just yet. Later that night, while Kelly was taking a shower, I took the wallet and with a razor blade, I carefully carved a faint but unmistakable scratch along the front, right across the initials. Not enough to make it obvious to anyone without looking closely, but enough to ruin the pristine finish. I slipped it back into the attic where I had found it, taping the gift box shut again. I cleaned up and acted like nothing was wrong. Kelly remained oblivious. The next day, I watched her movements like a hawk. She seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, typing out messages then deleting them just as quickly. At dinner, I watched her fumble with her fork and glance nervously at the clock, rushing through her meal with excuses about meeting the girls for a late movie. The lie was so poorly constructed it almost amused me. Late movie on a Thursday? I asked, swirling the wine in my glass. She blinked too hard, caught off guard. Yeah, we're seeing that new romantic comedy. You know how the girls are, she laughed, avoiding my eyes. I nodded slowly, feigning indifference. Sounds fun, I said, hiding the storm brewing behind my calm expression. After she left, I sat in the dim kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me. My heart wasn't just broken, it was starting to turn cold. I wasn't going to accuse her. No, I wanted the truth without her telling it. I needed to see it with my own eyes, feel the weight of it fully, and then decide what to do. That night, I barely slept, replaying every glance, every misplaced laugh, every game night she claimed to have spent at friends' houses. The next evening, she returned home, strangely quiet, not chipper like the past week. Something had shifted. She barely spoke, excused herself to bed early, and left me alone with the rattle of suspicion echoing through the house. I decided then I wouldn't make a move until I knew exactly who the wallet was for. And once I did, there'd be no coming back from it. The following week was agony disguised as routine. Every mundane task felt like a thread unraveling, pulling me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Kelly acted like everything was fine, maybe even too fine. She clung to this exaggerated image of the perfect housewife, cooking elaborate dinners and planning little date nights, as if to patch over the obvious cracks forming between us. But I was no longer looking at the meals or the candlelight. I was watching her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw when her phone buzzed, the fake laughter that didn't reach her eyes. The real torment wasn't the lie itself, but the performance. The longer it went on, the more certain I became that she was guilty of something far worse than I had imagined. It all came to a head on Saturday. I decided to follow her. It wasn't the proudest moment of my life, but pride had taken a back seat long ago. Kelly told me she was meeting up with Tom and Linda, an old couple from the neighborhood who were practically fossils and rarely left their porch, let alone organize dinner parties. Still, I nodded, kissed her on the cheek, and pretended to believe her. An hour later, I trailed behind her in my truck, headlights off, nerves steeled. I followed her past the town limits, down a winding back road until she pulled into the parking lot of the Maple Lantern, a rustic little diner we sometimes went to when we wanted to escape the familiar faces of town. Only tonight, she wasn't escaping with me. My pulse raced as I watched her step out of the car, adjust her hair in the window, and stride confidently into the diner. Moments later, another figure approached, a man. Tall, well-built, dressed sharp. His name was Derek. I knew him from the golf course, from church even. We weren't friends, but I'd shaken his hand enough times to know his face well. I felt the blood drain from mine. There it was. The answer, standing right in front of me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to storm in there, flip the table, and demand answers. But something told me to wait. I sat there watching through the fogged-up glass as they sat close, leaned in, shared quiet smiles. My heart sank lower with every passing minute until Derek suddenly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo album. Kelly's eyes widened, and soon both of them were thumbing through it, laughing quietly. No touches, no lingering gazes, nothing like I had expected. I squinted harder. On the table lay blueprints, brochures, and pamphlets. It wasn't a date, it was business. Derek was showing Kelly design layouts and images of homes, renovation plans, maybe even investment ideas. They weren't sneaking around. They were planning something. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by confusion. When Kelly returned home hours later, she was as chipper as ever. "You wouldn't believe how good Tom's homemade wine was," she said, her words practically oozing forced excitement. "Oh, I'm sure it was," I replied, forcing a smile, still unsettled by what I had seen. But it wasn't over. The next morning, as I stepped into the living room with my coffee, I noticed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were the same blueprints I had seen at the diner, marked with handwritten notes. In the margins, I spotted Derek's name along with Kelly's unmistakable cursive. Relief again? Maybe. Yet something still didn't add up. If it was all innocent, why the elaborate lies? Why had a business meeting behind a dinner with non-existent neighbors? Fueled by suspicion, I confronted her later that day. "So how are Tom and Linda?" I asked casually. Kelly, mid-sip of her tea, nearly choked. "Oh, same old stories," she laughed nervously. "They still have that ugly yellow porch swing?" I pressed, watching her face for the slightest crack. Kelly froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but to me, it screamed volumes. Yep, still yellow," she said, forcing a nod. I knew better. Tom and Linda had replaced that swing last spring. I was the one who helped them haul the old one to the dump. But I said nothing. No questions. No confrontations. I just let it fester inside me, fueling the fire. That night, lying next to her, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a lie. I was dealing with a masterful cover-up, and she was willing to dig herself deeper into it. I stared at the ceiling as the quiet breathing of the woman I thought I knew filled the room. She wasn't just hiding something. She was desperate to keep it hidden, and I was desperate to find out what it was. The following days were a haze of carefully staged normalcy, but every moment screamed at me that something wasn't right. Kelly was trying too hard. She had suddenly become the model wife, cooking elaborate breakfasts, leaving sweet notes in my lunchbox, even dusting off the old scrapbook of our first years together like she was auditioning for some award. Yet behind every smile and every affectionate gesture, I saw panic. It wasn't love, it was damage control. I could sense it in the way she flinched when I asked simple questions, or when her eyes darted toward her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. She was hiding something, but now I knew it wasn't Derek. I played the role of the oblivious husband perfectly, keeping my tone soft and my eyes blind. I let her believe I was buying the act, all while watching, listening, memorizing. The odd thing was Derek continued showing up here and there around town, always friendly but distant. If anything, he seemed less involved with Kelly than before. One evening, when I ran into him at the hardware store, I pushed the conversation casually toward the meeting at the Maple Lantern. Derek blinked, puzzled. "Oh yeah, she wanted some advice on adding value to the property if you two ever wanted to sell," he said without hesitation. "Thought you guys were thinking about moving?" Moving? Kelly never mentioned that. My gut clenched. I thanked Derek, played it off like it was no big deal, but inside my mind was spinning. Why would Kelly be planning renovations and talking about selling the house behind my back? That night, I asked her, "Have you ever thought about moving?" The question landed like a thunderclap. She froze, then chuckled nervously. "Oh, well, just small talk with the girls. Nothing serious." Another lie. I saw it in her eyes. It was the same look she gave me when she told me her first dog ran away when we were kids, only for me to find out years later that it had been hit by a car and she couldn't bring herself to tell me. I let the conversation drop, but not without deciding that I'd dig deeper. The next day, while Kelly was at work, I rummaged through her office. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Proof? A confession scribbled on a post-it? Instead, I found a hidden compartment in her desk behind the lower drawer. Tucked inside was a leather-bound notebook and an envelope marked only with the letter. The notebook was filled with budget notes, renovation plans, lists of furniture, room layouts, but none of it involved me. Every note read like she was preparing the house for someone else entirely. The envelope contained 2 tickets to a music festival in Nashville, 1 ticket already missing. My stomach flipped. Kelly hated festivals. She used to make fun of them. Yet here was a ticket clearly torn away and presumably gifted to someone. But the name was still a mystery. Was it someone from work? A new friend? My mind went to every man we knew, but none of them fit. And why was she doing all this behind my back? Preparing for a move, a life, or perhaps even an escape. That evening, I watched her like I was watching a stranger. She cooked my favorite, meatloaf with cornbread and mashed potatoes, humming like it was just another Thursday. "You've been busy lately," I said between bites. "Anything special coming up?" She smiled sweetly. "Nothing special, just trying to make sure you feel appreciated." I nearly laughed. It was the kind of sweet you tasted and knew it was spoiled underneath. But I didn't show it. Instead, I leaned in and played along, nodding and thanking her. Deep down, I was boiling. Days passed. I noticed little things, more frequent texts from unknown numbers, sneaking out onto the porch late at night, whispering into her phone. The lies layered like bricks, building a wall between us. Yet still, no hard proof. Just enough to keep me questioning, doubting, second-guessing myself. Was I becoming paranoid? Or was she just that good at covering her tracks? It wasn't until I caught her off guard while she was doing laundry that I saw it again. The wallet. The same scratched wallet from the attic, now wrapped freshly with a new ribbon, sitting atop a pile of folded clothes. I casually pointed at it. "That for someone special?" I teased. Her entire body stiffened for a second too long before she forced a laugh. "Oh, just an old gift I forgot about. For your birthday, actually." My birthday was 2 months away. The lie was clumsy. Too clumsy. I knew right then. She wasn't done lying. Not even close. She was spinning this web tighter and tighter. But what she didn't know was that I was ready to rip it apart. I just needed to wait, and soon enough, the truth would come to me, whether she was ready or not. The following week felt like I was living inside a slow-burning nightmare. Every word out of Kelly's mouth, every exaggerated laugh, every sudden show of affection, it all reeked of guilt. Yet the true identity of M remained hidden behind a fog she carefully maintained. I was spiraling, waking up in the middle of the night with my mind racing, combing through every interaction, every past conversation, searching for clues. The notebook, the ticket, the wallet, each one taunted me like puzzle pieces from a picture I couldn't yet see. Still, I wasn't ready to explode. Not yet. I wanted the truth to reveal itself on its own, undeniable and raw. By midweek, I started paying attention to patterns. Kelly's late-night texts became more frequent, her smiles more fleeting. She'd slip away on weekend mornings under the excuse of visiting her sister or running errands. I knew she was lying. I just didn't know where she was going. I decided I needed to follow her again, but this time I would be ready. Saturday morning arrived cloudy and gray. Kelly kissed me goodbye, carrying her purse and her usual thermos of coffee. "Going to help Mary with the yard sale," she said without blinking. Mary, our neighbor, had moved out 2 months ago. I grunted, pretending to be distracted by the paper, but my eyes followed her out the window until her car disappeared down the street. I waited precisely 10 minutes before grabbing my keys and following. Kelly didn't head towards Mary's old house. Instead, she took the interstate, heading west. I tailed her from distance, my heart pounding as I gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. After about 45 minutes, she pulled into a small cabin lodge just outside the next town, a place we had only visited once years ago for a friend's engagement party. It was isolated, surrounded by tall pines and empty gravel roads. No one comes out here unless they want privacy. I parked a ways off and watched from behind the trees. Kelly stepped out of the car with a nervous glance around, clutching the gift-wrapped wallet in her hand. Minutes later, someone stepped out from the cabin. Matt, my fishing buddy since high school, the man I considered closer than a brother, the man I had trusted with my life more times than I could count. He grinned when he saw her, pulling her into an embrace that left no room for misinterpretation. I felt my knees buckle. The trees around me swayed, but I stood frozen, breathless. Matt? Of all people? I wanted to burst out from the trees, scream, drag them both out by their collars, but something inside me, something cold and calculating, held me back. I needed more than a hug. I needed certainty. I stayed hidden for hours, watching through the shifting branches as they sat on the porch, sipping coffee, laughing, touching like they had all the time in the world. Every time Kelly brushed her hand against his, I clenched my fists tighter. They were too comfortable, too familiar, as if this wasn't the first time. Mike had told me this had been happening for a while. Maybe even on those so-called Friday night game nights, they always invited me to but never insisted I attend. The notebook suddenly made sense. Renovation plans weren't for us. They were for them. As dusk settled in and the lights inside the cabin glowed warm and soft, I knew without a doubt what I was about to witness. They disappeared inside together. The door closed. No more denials. No more benefit of the doubt. This wasn't business or a misunderstanding. Kelly was cheating on me. And with Matt. The betrayal hit me harder than I could have imagined. I stood there, not crushed but furious. Strangely calm. The kind of calm you feel right before a storm shatters everything. No one had to tell me what happened behind that closed door. I had enough. I drove home under a dark sky, headlights cutting through the fog as my mind spun with 100 thoughts. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. The old me might have done that. But the man behind the wheel that night, he wasn't the same. Kelly had no idea that the version of me she kissed goodbye that morning had died the moment I saw her in Matt's arms. And now, what came next was no longer about heartbreak. It was about ending this on my terms. I pulled into the driveway. The house is still and quiet as the night itself. Sitting alone in the living room, staring at the empty couch where Kelly usually curled up with me after a long day, I realized I no longer cared why she did it. The only thing I cared about now was how I was going to make sure they both regretted every choice they made. The following days felt like I was walking through someone else's life, like I was simply watching through a glass window as Kelly went about pretending everything was normal. I played my part flawlessly. I kissed her in the mornings, shared quiet dinners in the evenings, and nodded along to her half-hearted stories, all while plotting the perfect way to burn everything down. She didn't notice how detached I had become, or maybe she just didn't care. That same woman who used to read me like a book now couldn't even spot the storm gathering right in front of her. She believed she was in control. That was her first mistake. I spent my evenings gathering every detail I could about their little affair. I went through bank statements, phone records, even those meaningless little calendar notes Kelly thought were private. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. Every game night at Matt's cabin was marked down like some recurring appointment. Never questioned because, why would I? He was my closest friend. The fishing trips we supposedly planned together had been fewer and fewer over the past year because, apparently, Matt had been busy entertaining my wife in ways I had failed to notice. When Friday night rolled around, the night of their usual cabin rendezvous, I left as usual. Told Kelly I was heading to an out-of-town tackle expo, something I knew would bore her enough not to ask questions. Instead, I drove a few miles out, parked behind the old service road, and hiked through the woods toward the cabin under cover of night. I knew every inch of those woods, every crooked tree, every hidden trail, and by the time I reached the clearing, I could see the dim glow of the cabin lights. I crept closer, stepping silently over brittle twigs and fallen leaves, inching near enough to see them through the window. There they were, Kelly sitting across Matt at the table, wine glasses clinking, laughter filling the cabin. Their bodies leaned in close, touches that lingered, gazes that held just a little too long. There wasn't a trace of guilt in either of them. I could have kicked down that door, screamed, fought, made a mess out of everything, but no. I stood there, forcing myself to watch. I needed to see it all, to feel every ounce of betrayal sink into my bones, so there wouldn't be an inch of me left to forgive them later. As the night dragged on, the worst of it unfolded. I watched Kelly move to the couch, Matt following like a loyal dog. Their silhouettes danced behind the thin curtains, unmistakable in their intimacy. My hands trembled with fury, but I kept still, biting down on my lip hard enough to taste blood. I didn't want them to know I was there. Not yet. When I finally turned away and headed back into the woods, I wasn't the same man who had stepped in. Something in me had died under that cold moonlight, but something else had taken its place. Cold resolve. I wasn't going to confront them in some pitiful emotional breakdown. I wasn't going to sob or beg. Kelly didn't deserve my heartbreak, and Matt sure as hell didn't deserve my anger. What they were going to get was worse. The following morning, I returned home before Kelly. I cooked breakfast like nothing had happened, even left a bouquet of fresh-cut wildflowers on the kitchen table, just to see how long she could keep up the charade. She came back smiling, humming a soft tune, pretending like she hadn't just betrayed her husband with his best friend. Good morning, she chirped, pecking me on the cheek. I almost laughed. Almost. I went about the day as if the night before never existed. She didn't suspect a thing. The notebook? Back in place. The wallet? Still hidden. The festival ticket? Still missing. And me? I was done playing the fool. I knew now who the lover was, where they met, and how they carried on behind my back. The only thing left was timing. And oh, I had all the time in the world. I spent the next week methodically setting the stage. There was no rage in my actions, only precision. Every word I spoke to Kelly, every forced smile, every fake chuckle was a brick in the wall I was quietly building between us. I pretended to be the loving husband, the oblivious fool. Meanwhile, I was orchestrating the perfect reveal. I even let Kelly believe she was winning, lavishing her with attention, making her feel secure in the deception. What she didn't know was that I had already decided the date, the place, and the audience. I picked the Oakwood Tavern, Matt and Kelly's favorite spot. They loved the Friday karaoke nights and lazy Sunday lunches there. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, the center of town gossip, and the one place where secrets didn't stay hidden for long. I called in a few favors, reserved the back room under the guise of surprise anniversary party for Kelly. Everyone was invited. Family, neighbors, old fishing buddies, even Matt's unsuspecting fiancée, Rachel. I wanted every single person who mattered to them to be there. If Kelly thought I was going to crumble, she was dead wrong. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to perform. On the night of the event, I dressed sharp, shaved clean, and plastered on the calmest smile I could manage. Kelly arrived on my arm, radiant and smug beneath the surface. "Ethan, this is all so sweet," she whispered as I guided her through the tavern doors, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. The room burst into cheers and applause. Friends and family raised glasses, music played, and for a moment, it almost felt genuine. Kelly ate it up, her eyes glowing under the soft glow of the tavern lights. I played along perfectly, introducing her to guests, sharing inside jokes, pouring her glass after glass of wine. She was too busy basking in the attention to notice that Matt hadn't shown up yet. When the time felt right, I excused myself, slipping out to the parking lot where Rachel stood nervously by her car, confused by my sudden invitation. I had kept her out of the loop, not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to see it for herself. "Trust me," I said, handing her the notebook I had found. "You want to be inside when I give my toast." Her trembling hands flipped through the pages, and as the color drained from her face, I knew she understood. Without another word, she followed me inside. Back in the tavern, I tapped my glass and stood, commanding the room's attention. "I just want to say how grateful I am tonight," I began, eyes sweeping across the crowd. Kelly beamed beside me, fingers laced with mine. "Grateful to all of you for being here, and grateful to my wife, Kelly, for being the most committed, loyal partner a man could ask for." Laughter and light applause rippled through the room. I let it hang there for a beat. And I'm especially thankful for my best friend, Matt, who's always been by my side, on the water, and, as I recently learned, in other places too. A hush fell over the room. Kelly's hand stiffened in mine. The blood drained from her face as I pulled out the notebook and held it up. "It's impressive, really, the detail you both went into for your secret life. The planning, the hiding, the boldness to carry on behind my back with everyone right here oblivious." Well, almost everyone. I turned to Rachel, who stood frozen in the corner, tears welling up in her eyes as Matt finally stepped into the room, realizing too late what was happening. Kelly whispered, "Ethan, please," under her breath, her voice shaking. I ignored her. "Turns out, while I was out fishing, you two were playing your own little game." I continued, my voice steady. Gasps spread across the room. Chairs scraped against the floor as people leaned in closer. I could see neighbors whispering, family members blinking in disbelief. Rachel covered her mouth in horror as Matt took a hesitant step forward, only to be met by her glare. "I'd raise a glass to you both," I said, lifting mine, "but frankly, you're not worth the good whiskey." I set the glass down, pushed my chair back, and nodded toward Rachel. "Come on, let's get some fresh air." Without another word, Rachel followed me out, leaving Kelly sobbing at the table. surrounded by the crumbling remains of the perfect image she tried so hard to maintain. As the door swung shut behind us, the sounds of murmurs and shocked gasps filled the air, sealing Kelly and Matt's social execution. The whole town would know by morning. There would be ghosts walking these streets, and I didn't feel a sliver of pity. The days after the tavern unfolded like a bad play. Kelly couldn't seem to quit. The very next morning, she showed up on my doorstep with tear-soaked cheeks and trembling hands, as if her crocodile tears would somehow rewrite what everyone had seen with their own eyes. She carried herself like a woman desperate, cornered, still clinging to the delusion that words and empty apologies could salvage what was long since beyond repair. I opened the door, stood there silent, just watching her squirm. "Ethan, please," she whimpered, stepping inside without an invitation. "We can fix this. We can work through it. You don't have to throw it all away." She paced the living room like a caged animal, hands wringing, eyes darting around the room as if searching for something familiar to anchor herself. But there was nothing left here for her. This house wasn't her sanctuary anymore. It was just walls and furniture, indifferent to her pleas. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, letting her ramble. The more she spoke, the more obvious it became that this wasn't about love. It was about her reputation, her control slipping through her fingers like water. "We've had years together," she continued, desperation rising in her voice. "We built this life. We can, please, Ethan, we can still have it." She reached out to me, but I stepped back, shaking my head with calm disgust. "Kelly, we had something," I said flatly. "Past tense. You killed it. You and Matt. Every Friday night you lied. Every secret you buried. You killed it." Her lip quivered, but I didn't stop. "And don't you dare stand there acting like this is about us. This isn't about saving a marriage. It's about you saving face." She gasped, stepping back like I had slapped her. "That's not true," she cried. "I love you. I made a mistake, but I cut her off." "You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is buying the wrong brand of coffee. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. What you did was a choice. Every time you sneaked off, every time you fed me some story about game nights, every damn time you smiled at me knowing you were betraying me, you chose this." Her face crumpled, but still, she tried to close the distance. "We can go to counseling. We can fix this, Ethan. Don't you remember how much we loved each other?" I stared hard at her, and for the first time in all of this, I realized I didn't feel hurt anymore. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of knowing I had the power now. "I remember," I said. "I remember everything. I remember thinking you were the one person in this world who wouldn't do what you did. And now I remember that you're just like the rest." Tears streamed down her face as she fell onto the couch, sobbing. I let her. I didn't comfort her. I didn't flinch. I watched as she finally realized there would be no soft landing this time. "You're just throwing me away?" she choked out between sobs. "No," I said, voice sharp. "You threw yourself away. I'm just letting you live with it." For the next week, she tried every angle. Tearful texts, pitiful voicemails, even showing up at my work pretending like she just wanted to talk. Every time, I turned her away. The worst was when she tried to spin it to others, telling mutual friends that it was just a rough patch, that we were working through things. But no one was buying it. After the tavern, everyone knew. The whispers followed her wherever she went. Even Matt, from what I heard, was avoiding the public like a plague. The golden couple of the neighborhood, reduced to pariahs overnight. When she showed up one last time, suitcase in hand, begging to come home, I didn't even open the door. I watched her through the glass as she knocked and cried, mouthing the words, "It's over," before turning and walking away. She screamed, a raw, frustrated sound that echoed down the street. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look back. Kelly was no longer my problem. She had made her choices, and now she could live with the consequences. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.